It's such a pleasure to meet you all. My name is Agnes McKenna. I am a senior associate with the business consulting and research team at Intellecap, and I will be your moderator for this lovely session. To set the context, waste management is very critical for all countries globally, and proper waste management seems to be a challenge for a lot of countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. To properly put this into perspective, Sub-Saharan Africa is projected to be the world's fastest growing region for waste generation by 2050. At the same time, more than 90% of waste produced is disposed of in uncontrolled dump sites, and only 4% is recycled. This is especially because the traditional methods for recycling and disposal of waste are unable to deal with the growing amount of waste that is being generated on the continent. And so a stronger focus on circularity and resource efficiency is needed. And that's why we're here today for this session. The Bestseller Foundation is committed to supporting innovative startups working at the frontline to convert waste into value, with the ultimate goal of creating sustainable businesses and sustainable economies. And so through this session, we're hoping to achieve 3 among very many other ambitious goals. 1, to help build awareness about the circular economy in Sub-Saharan Africa. 2, to build a deeper understanding of opportunities and challenges, as well as market building enterprise, as well as the market building efforts that are needed to catapult the circular economy into the future. And 3, to build a deeper understanding of innovative business models across the continent. And so how are we going to do this? We are taking you on a circularity journey across Sub-Saharan Africa. The first stage is that we are going to first set the context, give you a picture of what circular innovations exist within the market. This conversation will be guided by Bezawit and Wasa of the Bestseller Foundation. She is going to sort of give you a landscape of what the current state of circular economy and waste to value looks like across Sub-Saharan Africa. The second will be to have a zoom in on some of the waste to value enterprises in the region. You're going to be meeting 3 innovative startups. They'll tell you about their businesses, their business models, some of the challenges that they face, and why they decided to venture in this very nascent sector. Third stage will be to look at also the investor highlights. We're going to speak to some of the investors who are investing in this space, find out what excites them, what they look forward to, and hopefully have a very holistic conversation around the waste and circular economy models that exist in the continent. And so without much further ado, here are some of the housekeeping rules just to ensure that our session is able to run smoothly. Please mute your laptops through the session. We are hoping to have a very interactive session. Send in as many questions, as many comments or contributions that you have to the conversation as they're ongoing on the chats. I will be taking the speakers through 15 minutes of Q&A. I'll be picking the questions from the chat and sharing them with our speakers, so we'll get to answer your questions. And the third thing is that we have lots to unpack and not enough time as always. So please allow me to be a timekeeper today. I might be a little bit strict, so bear with me, but I'm hoping to have a very great and engaged session with you all. So I will now hand over to Yannick, who will tell us a little bit more about the Bestseller Foundation and why they're also working within this sector. Thank you. Yannick?
Thank you, Agnes. Hi, everyone. From the team here at Bestseller Foundation, a warm welcome to you all. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your interest. We allow ourselves to take this as your support for an agenda that we also support here at the foundation, an agenda that we continue to push, and an important agenda towards the circular economy in Sub-Saharan Africa. And there's no time to waste in that respect. So to set this agenda up for success, we need lots of different actors, and therefore I'm also very pleased that we in this session are joined by experts, by entrepreneurs and businesses and investors in this space. At Bestseller Foundation, we support in entrepreneurs and we invest in businesses that find opportunity in working with waste, in reaping value from waste, in reducing waste, in reusing and recycling valuable resources. And we're just about to have concluded a round of 7 investments into waste to value startups in Rwanda, and Uganda, and Kenya. And 5 of these are actually also part of our waste to value accelerator that we are running together with Intellecap. Now we're looking to do more startup investments for innovation, for job creation across the continent. And we're now also looking at investment opportunities into businesses at slightly more stages, more mature stages also. Also for job creation and for scaling already proven models. I'd say for enhancing infrastructure, for building out capacity in this sector. It's to support. It's all about supporting sustainable growth. It's for livelihoods. It's for the well-being of our natural world. And our efforts, sure, are focused on helping to tackle the challenge with the growing amount of waste generated on the continent. But we really want to turn the narrative around and talk about opportunity. It's about seizing opportunity in this space as we see it. It's said that the 21st century is the African century. We strongly believe in the opportunities towards circular economy on the continent, and that's really what this session is about. So we just hope that you'll enjoy it. Thank you again for being here, and back to you, Agnes.
Thank you so much, Yannick. Now that everyone knows and understands what Bestseller is doing and the vision that they have for this session that we're hosting, I'll now kick it off to Wasa. Oh, actually, before I do that, I forgot to mention that aside from taking this journey, we are also going to be interesting you in a few activities to sort of just understand who's in the room and achieve one of the outcomes of this session, which is to network and map where the various players are and what activities we're all doing. So the first thing that we are going to be doing is we'll be launching polls between one segment to the next. You'll only take maybe 1 minute to answer these polls, and then we'll display the results on the screen. As the next segment comes in, maybe we can articulate or explore 1 or 2 points out of those polls. The next thing is that my colleague Mercy will add a link on the chat for a mural activity that we are having. What we're hoping to do is capture the different activities being carried out by different stakeholders, whether it's in research and advocacy, whether it's in business support and business model sort of work, or whether it's in capital and financing. So the link has already been shared, I can see. We're hoping that everyone will be able to access it and sort of be able to fill in the mural as we go on. And towards the end, we will go through some of the answers and discussion areas that we find from that. So Wasa, over to you, and Bezawit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our session. So the segment I will be taking you through will be setting the scene. We have the immense and tremendous honor to have Bezawit with us. So I will be asking her a set of questions, and then we'll be able to move forward. Welcome, Bezawit. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and being part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting to be here. Actually, for those who do not know her, do not worry. My first question is actually for you, Bezawit, to please introduce yourself and your work.
So I am here this afternoon representing the African Circular Economy Network. It's a continental organization with about 28 African countries, part of being the network. And we have our main focus area is on promoting circular economy, the idea and the principles in the first place. And then next to that, we do also support organizations who are working on policy and guidance. So that's what we do. I am representing the Ethiopia chapter.
And a little bit about yourself and your background.
My background, I'm actually a natural science person. I studied chemistry and biology at Addis Ababa University. And for the past almost 14 years, I've been working with different UN organizations. And now I'm working with the African Circular Economy Network.
That's very interesting. And from all of this experience, what do you see right now as the main opportunities when it comes to circular economy in Sub-Saharan Africa?
I would say all eyes are on Africa for quite a number of reasons. Of course, there are a lot of actors in the global platform, but why Africa? It has a lot of added values. For example, there will be a high rate of urbanization, high rate of industrialization, with still room to include circular concepts and principles. It is the largest market niche, I would say. And it's not only the solid waste producer, but also the biggest receiver of waste from elsewhere in the world. The young population which is unemployed is also high in number. So we need to find innovative ways to create jobs which are meaningful for those young ones also. So for a number of reasons, Africa is the new destination to embrace circular economy, I would say.
I completely agree. But have you come across some interesting business model or innovation you think we should be exploring?
Well, in general, the idea of circular economy is not new in Africa. What is new for the African context is the innovation part. Waste is not actually waste, like clothes, for example, is not thrown away, but it is given to the next sibling. It is not a new concept, but making sure that the textile, the fabric itself is designed in such a way that it is not up either in the landfill or with the siblings is something that is new for Africa. So in that regards, a lot of companies, small scale SMEs actually are picking up textile sectors, post-agricultural waste products to make paper and other recyclable materials, packaging. Same story, instead of making the PET bottles back into PET bottles, textile fibers. The mobile app use is now becoming very rampant in a lot of African countries, which is in a way supporting the waste collection, like optimizing the waste collection system. So those are the ones which are really emerging.
Yeah, you just mentioned three types of waste: the plastic, fashion, and also the e-waste. Do you think there's any other type of waste we should be considering when we talk about circular economy?
Well, Africa is rapidly urbanizing, and then there's a need for making sure that a lot of affordable housing. And the construction sector is something which is also picking up. The reason being, the waste used to be just thrown to the public, to the landfills, but now a lot of young ones are coming up with innovative ideas to refabric the waste, redesign it in such a way that it's either a block or something like that. So those are the two emerging ones, I would say also.
All right, and that will be a tricky question because you're from Ethiopia, which is East Africa. But I was wondering if you think that circular economy and waste management in general is a bit more advanced in another region of Africa. Where do you think that the future is right now?
Well, every region has its own peculiar characteristics. For example, if you invest in, for example, in Rwanda on ICTs, I would say it is an ideal place to do so because they are more advanced in the ICT sectors. And then when you do the infrastructure, which really requires you to make sure that the business startup models are not facing hindrances, I would say Kenya would be ideal. And then, of course, the technological, not only technological, but I'm just giving you on the top of my mind who would be a good ideal place. And then countries like Senegal and Morocco have already started working on designing their circular roadmap. So they would be in a more better position to embrace that one. So these are just the low-hanging fruits that each country can do.
And those are such great input. Thank you so much, Bezawit. I'm glad that you're mentioning Rwanda, Senegal, and all of these other countries, because as Yannick said, we at the foundation are also looking now to broader space than only East Africa and looking at other places. So it's nice to hear that change and progress and new innovation are coming in other parts of the continent. Thank you so much for your input. Agnes, I'll get it back to you. Thank you so much, Bezawit.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wasa Bezawit. It was lovely hearing more about what some of the emerging trends that you see are when it comes to waste and some of the circular innovations. Also hearing about some of the roadmaps that countries are starting to create. We've seen a lot of activity in that in East Africa. Senegal and Morocco are new additions to the conversation. And I think at this point, we will put up the first polling question. Okay, thank you for that, Mercy. I don't know, oh, let me share the results. Great. So everyone can see who is in the room. We have a lot of investors, a lot of entrepreneur support organizations, entrepreneurs, civil society, bilateral and multilateral institutions, as well as corporations. So thank you so much for that. And now that we have sort of gotten a look at what the circular economy looks like in Sub-Saharan Africa, we've also understood who's in the room. I think we'll dive into the next segment, which is zooming into waste to value ventures in the region. The format for this session is that every entrepreneur, and we're going to have 3 of them, will have 5 minutes to talk about their businesses. They will tell you about their business models, the key opportunities that they see in the sector, as well as some of the challenges and bottlenecks that they have. As they continue to present this, I hope to get as many questions as possible from the audience. We want to keep it as engaging as possible. And I will take 15 minutes towards the end to go through the Q&A and address some of these questions. So our entrepreneurs for this segment will be Wale Adebi of We Cyclers, Emil Furi of Y Waste, and Daniel Paffenholz of Takataka Solutions. So let's start with Wale.
All right. You want me to go ahead?
Yes. Yes, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys for having us today. So my name is Wale. I'm the CEO of We Cyclers. So We Cyclers is, a social enterprise that was actually formed in 2012 by actually my sister, who came up with the idea while she was doing a course, doing an MBA program. And really the focus was approaching a problem, from the bottom up. When we receive challenges in Africa, there's a lot of ideas on how to solve the problem. But we're talking about waste in this case, and realize that in the world there's over 1 billion people that struggle with waste management, and in Africa, in Lagos in particular, where we live, there's over 20 million people, and waste is one of our biggest challenges. Lagos State generates over 15,000 metric tons of waste daily. Of that waste, only 40% is actually formally removed from the community or where it's a formalized waste collection exists. And then if you think about some of the lower income areas, there is no waste management structure that allows individuals to get rid of their waste. So what you find is people take this waste and dump it in the nearest gutter or the nearest streetway or waterway that they find to get rid of it. And so the idea for this business or social venture was to help people understand the value of the waste that they were disposing. And somebody mentioned earlier that only about 5% of materials are recycled. If you look at the waste stream currently in Lagos, about over 15% are plastics, and all of that is recyclable. And then you can think about the metals, which is about 5%. So total volume of recyclable materials is almost 40% of what we're disposing of on a daily basis. So the focus for our venture was to help people understand that the waste that they were disposing on the streets actually had value. And so our model is really based on incentivizing waste recycling. So we go to households, primarily in low-income communities. We talk to them about the value of the waste. And somebody also mentioned earlier that the circular economy is not just starting in Africa; it's actually been in existence, but not just in a formal manner. So what we have is there's been a lot of informal waste collection happening in dump sites and landfill settlements that has been going on for decades, but just not structured. So what we cyclists try to do is really focus on going to low-income communities, households, and neighborhoods and educate them, and then try to deal with the problem at the source. Because if we're going to deal with this issue and solve the problem, we have to be able to eliminate or prevent the material making its way to the landfills or the gutters or the waterways. And so what we do is we educate them on the recyclables. But one key thing that we have to really make people understand, particularly in our context, is that education is really just a piece of the puzzle. We have to incentivize. And we're dealing with a big issue of poverty, which in the index we have over 70 to 80% of Nigerians living below the poverty line. So what we try to tie our model to is incentivizing by paying money for these recyclables. We started by just giving household items and really evolved over time to start incentivizing its cash. And we're paying individuals cash for their recyclables. Recyclers then converts the material and then sells to an off-taker that converts it to a higher value product. So a lot of what we do, we collect over 70% of our volumes are PET bottles. A lot of that goes into making fabric and it gets exported to other parts of the world. There's also opportunities to take this material to a bottle-to-bottle recycling facility to make new packaging. So WeCycler essentially is closing the loop with these communities and preventing the material from making its way to the landfills. And the landfills still do exist today. And what we try to do is encourage more and more people to divert their waste down through our model and make sure it's more effective and efficient to get into an off-taker.
Wale, what are some of the challenges that you've come across for your business?
Well, I think there are a lot of challenges, more than I can actually speak to on this particular platform, but I can say that, as we grow our model, the biggest issue that we had initially was getting people to believe in what we were doing. And so we literally started out with just one bicycle and we were going door to door trying to educate people. And it took a while for people to actually believe us and actually take us seriously. So we struggled with getting people to buy in initially. And then, once we're able to get some critical mass of people actually buying into the model, we've begun to struggle with obviously scaling up our model, because once it made sense, the next step is to actually start to expand and grow the volumes. So one of the things that has limited our growth, I would say, is value addition. Nigeria today consumes over 150,000 metric tons of PET pellets, virgin, but only about 10% of that is recycled. So if you don't have a demand for offtake plastics or recycling plastics locally, the volume and the demand, the value will be very low. So what we see is there's a lack of investment in recycling and value addition for recyclable materials.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that, Wale. Thank you for taking us through your entrepreneurial journey. I think some of the interesting insights for me that I come across a lot also are that you have to start with awareness creation right at the source. The waste infrastructure in most of our countries is very informal. There's still so much work to be done to actually build the recycling systems and the right infrastructure to be able to have successful ventures. And so it's important to start right at the source if you're looking to actually create something that's going to be sustainable and impactful. The second point that I picked up from that is, just like any other enterprise, we have different challenges at different stages of the entrepreneurial, I think, journey, and different solutions apply to those different challenges. So it's interesting that you have been growing through your journey, and it was very interesting hearing about the impact that you're creating in Nigeria. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
To the audience, I'm expecting as many questions, I still insist. And now I think we will move on to, we're going to move on to Emil. And before, or as he sets up, another reminder is that we still have the mural, and we hope that you'll be able to fill it in as the conversations continue. So Emil, you have 5 minutes. Your time begins now.
Thanks.
And then I'll handle the question towards the end. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a very quick, short presentation. Can Can everyone see that quite clearly? Agnes, can you see that? Cool. So my name is Emil Fourie. I co-founded Y-Waste in 2010, 2009, 2010. Just our business model and our service offering, we locally beneficiating food waste and returning it into organic compost. The solutions we provide is either a collection service, so where people are source separating, or we offer a drop-off gate fee solution at cheaper than landfill rates to other waste management companies that are looking to start diverting organic waste. The types of food waste we're working with is pre-consumer and post-consumer organic waste, specifically coming from the retail, hospitality, and residential waste sectors. And then the compost product that we're manufacturing, we're selling to residential landscaper and food security gardens in the sector. Something that we've done, which is quite different, for every 5 bags of compost we sell to the private sector, a secondary market for us, we are donating to food security gardens in peri and urban peri regions in Cape Town for now, but we're hoping to grow and expand that offering as the business develops. So opportunities that, I'm speaking more in the broader sense of the term. Sorry, I just got a screen I need to try and move. There we go. So like Wally was mentioning earlier, I think one of the biggest opportunities for entrepreneurs looking in the waste beneficiation sector in Sub-Saharan Africa is definitely localized beneficiation to an economy of scale. I think it's very important to identify what those are. In terms of circularity, we want to look at primary, secondary, and tertiary markets for the different products that you are going to be beneficiating. An example of this is what we're doing at Y-Waste. Our primary market is to return all organic residue to the soil and then start looking at soil regeneration. But some secondary and tertiary markets could be looking at gas extraction through a improved composting process system where we could actually catch off some biogas. There's favorable legislation at the moment in the sector throughout the continent. I think that, an example locally that I've got is that there's a ban on organics going to landfill in the Western Cape. But something that's popped up very recently and it's quite new is that our government's budgets are very, very constrained. So they are finding it more and more difficult to become service providers and to deliver services, especially in smaller municipalities and government regions. And this is only going to be replicated throughout Africa. I think with less money in circulation, it's going to be very difficult for governments to sustain an ever-growing population. The African free trade opportunity is quite exciting. That really hasn't kicked off just yet, but it is an exciting opportunity that someone like myself is looking for. Sharing and knowledge transfer within Africa. I think there's so much opportunities in innovation. Just listening to what Wally was doing and the work that I'm doing here in South Africa, there's an opportunity that already exists. So it's something that I will follow up with after this call. And then there's some interesting innovations in public-private partnerships, especially with governments. I think we've seen it with COVID, where big corporates are now starting to assist government in their shortfalls and their shortcomings. So I think for investors and for funders and fund managers, there is an exciting opportunity to come on board in innovative ways to start addressing the crisis and the problems that we are facing. Some of the bottlenecks that I've experienced, so the finance application market and the reality thereof is a very, very difficult space to operate. What investors are looking for and what is out there and what sort of these businesses are trying to achieve, there is sort of a mismatch there. So I think there's an opportunity for investors and entrepreneurs to really sit down through discussions like this and get to better understand sort of what business goals are and targets are and what investors' expectations are and how do we actually get them to align a bit more. Something I keep throwing around is monetizing sustainable development goals and finding exciting ways to do that. There is a limited opportunity for idea to prototype. So again, looking at what Wally was saying, you know, if he had an opportunity to access waste a lot more easier and a lot smoother, he could scale his operation a lot quicker. So one of the bottlenecks that does exist is that entrepreneurs in the space don't have access to the raw materials that they would need as readily available as possible. So there is one of the gaps. And then again, access to sufficient waste linked with limited experience. So you've got people with ideas that then want to execute something, but they don't have the experience. Or you have people with their experience and they don't necessarily have the waste or the expansion capabilities that they require to then grow and to grow rapidly. So you're seeing companies or startups arrive, and it takes them between 5 to 10 years to get their business off the ground and to start turning a profit and to become reputable. And that's quite a long time in this game of innovation. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Emil. That was lovely. Thank you for covering all the 3 areas. Just like Ola also did, thank you for sharing your journey with us. Very interesting insights there, especially when it comes to localized beneficiation, how you can be able to adequately segment your different markets and the different demographics so that you can be able to serve them well and enhance the impact that you're creating as a business. And again, another thing that comes up, that came up before, again, is some of the challenges when it comes to scaling a business, especially when you think about how much time it really requires to start a business in this sector and get off the ground. So thank you so much for that. Next, we will go to Daniel. Daniel, you have 5 minutes, very ambitious 5 minutes, but I'm sure you can make it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm Daniel. I'm the founder and CEO of Taka Solutions. So as instructed by Agnes, I'll try to stay within the 5 minutes. So yeah, I'll quickly present what we do as a company, and then I have 1 slide on challenges and 1 on opportunities. So very quickly on what Taka Solutions does. So for those not from East Africa, Taka means waste in Swahili. So basically we are a vertically integrated waste management and recycling company. So that means practically that we are in kind of almost every part of the waste management value chain. So the first part of our operations, which you see here on the PowerPoint, is that we collect waste from any waste producer. Those could be residential, commercial, or industrial, schools, hospitals, shopping malls, anyone producing waste. Then instead of the kind of most common approach across Africa where waste ends up being taken to dump sites, we take waste to our waste sorting sites. These are also called mixed recovery facilities kind of in the waste sector. And there we sort the waste manually on conveyor belts with a bit of machinery into about 40 different fractions. Then the organic waste we take to our own compost plant, where we process the organic waste to compost or organic fertilizer, which is then sold to farmers. And the dry waste streams, we either work with external recyclers. So for example, cardboard goes to a paper mill. But a lot of the plastic materials we are recycling in-house. So we have 1 recycling plant where we are producing hot wash plastic flakes. So these are then the raw materials used by plastic manufacturers to make new products. And we're just about to launch a 2nd recycling plant for flexible packaging. So any kind of packaging like bread packaging, garbage bags, supermarket bags, anything like that. So those things we also recycle in-house. Then we're left on average with about 5% residual waste. And some of it, the more hazardous fractions, we also operate an incinerator for hazardous waste. Then to further add to the complication of all the things we do, we also buy back waste from waste pickers. So a bit similar to the first presentation. So we have buyback centers or trading points next to dump sites where we buy back those waste streams from them. We compact them and we either take them to our own recycling plant or to other recycling partners. Yeah, so on average through this model, which spans kind of collection, sorting, composting, recycling, trading or buyback and incineration, we've become the largest waste company in Kenya, keeping in mind it's a very fragmented market. So even though we're the largest, we just process about 70 tons a day, which is just about below 2% of Nairobi's total waste. We recycle on average 95% of the waste that we collect, which presents one of the highest recycling rates in the world. And we today employ about 350 staff across our operations. So that very quickly on us. So coming to the challenges, which are both relating to our operations and probably the wider sector as well. So the first big challenge is that there's a lot of cheap / illegal competition for waste collection. So what do I mean by that? Basically in Nairobi or Greater Nairobi, there's about 200 waste collection companies. So anyone can get an old truck, collect waste somewhere and dump it somewhere. So basically the market is too accessible for anyone to come in, and then the illegal disposal, so not going to the municipal dump site, but just dumping it somewhere at night is too easy. And as a consequence, all these companies are charging extremely low rates. And even if you are able to extract value from the recyclables as we are, you can never compete with someone who is just dumping at night down the road. So that's the first big challenge. The second challenge is that for a lot of the materials we sort, there are no offtake markets. So for example, today, other than one type of flexible packaging, so low density polyethylene, so these are the kind of supermarket and industrial wrapping sheets, all other kinds of flexible packaging doesn't really have an offtake market in Kenya, which is now why we are investing into a recycling plant ourselves. The same for textiles and shoes, there's almost no recycling going on. There's multiple mixed plastic streams, like for example, the one you see in the photo. So this is plastics that has multi-layers, different types of plastic mixed together. There's aluminum foil and many other materials that today you are able to sort, but there's no local recycling or recyclers that can offtake those materials. Another big challenge that we're facing is access to land for our operations, because mostly people don't really, or residents or residential houses don't really want to be in the vicinity of a waste site of any kind. But unfortunately in Kenya, and I think across many countries in Africa, there's no really zoning, or if there is, it's not enforced. So basically, even in an area that seems predominantly industrial, anyone can just put up residential housing. And the moment there's residential housing, there's always opposition to a project in waste management. And I think this generally relates to something that people in waste often call NIMBY, not in my backyard, because basically everyone is saying, this is a great initiative, we really want you guys, but just not in our backyard. But if you can be in no one's backyard, it becomes kind of a problem. Then very quickly on opportunities. So this is a bit echoing also the last presentation, especially in East Africa and Kenya at the moment, there's a lot of circular economy legislation that's about to come on board. So one of the examples is Kenya is about to launch an extended producer responsibility scheme. So that means that manufacturers or brands that are using plastic packaging have to pay a levy per kilogram of packaging they put into the environment. And that levy is going into a fund, and the fund uses those monies to then subsidize recyclers. So there's a lot of kind of financial support out of the local economy over the next, starting this year, that will come into the market. And that will really change the economics of recycling in a big way, because the subsidies present up to 30% of the final sales price of recycled plastics. The other thing that's being pushed heavily in the legislation is that the government, or the Kenyan government, is asking for waste to start going to sorting sites and no longer to dump sites, and asking for the organic waste to go to composting sites. Again, the question is always one of enforcement and kind of trickling it down into local regulations, but at least at a national level, the bill that's currently gone to Parliament, I think last week, is very strong on circular economy. The other opportunity that we see for us, and I think that again relates back to some other points made earlier, is the waste value chain across Africa is missing a lot of components. As I mentioned, there are many recycling fractions that could be recycled but are not recycled. So what we are seeing is that in such an early stage of this industry, there's a lot of opportunity in vertical integration, because just doing one part of the value stream. So if you put up a recycling plant, but you don't have access to the material, there's a problem, right? So you almost need to think about vertical integration as you're scaling, or even fairly early on, because you don't just need a way of making or recycling a material, you also need to have access to the raw material, which is why, for example, we are operating trading points. And at the same time, the more complex the materials become, you also need to have a very clear understanding of what the offtake market can take. So ideally, there's also strong relationships with offtakers. So in our case, a lot of the people that are our buyers for recyclable are also our clients on the waste production side. So it kind of needs to flow all together, because you need to go from raw material to processing to end customers. And yeah, and a lot of that needs to kind of be under one house, at least at the maturity stage that the sector is in at the moment. So thanks a lot. That's my quick points on challenges and opportunities. So I look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Daniel. One of my favorite things I think about your business, because I've interacted with you a lot, is that like we've established in our conversation and even listening to the other entrepreneurs, is that we have challenges all across the whole, value chain. And so I'm amazed every single time at how well you've been able to build through every single place, where there wasn't any infrastructure, you sort of were able to find the resources and whatever you needed to be able to build up to that. So that's always very inspiring to hear. Thank you so much to everyone for their presentations. That has been very illuminating. I hope the audience also shares the same sentiments. I'll now just take a quick look at the questions. Dorcas, who asks, what are the opportunities for SMEs in the emerging circular economy in Kenya? I think Daniel elaborated on that, but Daniel, maybe if you can give us two.
Okay. I think you need to look at it I think maybe coming back to my point, you need to look at for specific waste value streams. So for example, if you take PET bottles, there's already a lot of recyclers, but there's all of these recyclers are not getting enough raw materials. So I think, for example, in PET bottles, the opportunity is in collection, compacting. That's actually probably one of the biggest opportunities. How do you collect efficiently at scale? And the only way to achieve that is to compact waste to reduce transport. And most waste across Africa is still collected loose. So the moment you invest into compaction, which is actually not a very high capital expenditure, there's a lot of opportunities there, especially for material streams where there's already enough recyclers. So versus on material streams that there are no recyclers today, so a lot of flexible packaging on that, there are a lot of opportunities, but the entry costs are significantly higher because you need to, one, rely on existing collection system that doesn't always exist, and two, you need to invest into the capital expenditure of a recycling plant where we're talking a few $100,000 at a minimum. So there are opportunities, it's just the entry costs are a lot higher, and also the technical know-how in operations and who is going to be the buyer is also more difficult. So that as a short answer.
Thank you. That's a very detailed short answer. There's a question to Wale from Judith. How is it dealing with local authorities and cartels in the communities that you work in?
Yeah, so we cyclers, when we first started out, we had a direct relationship with the Lagos State Waste Management Authority, who pretty much is in charge of all the waste generated in Lagos State. And that relationship has been very, very strong to date. We've been in a business for almost 9 years now. And we were very thankful for that relationship because the Lagos State Waste Management Authority actually gave us the space we need for our aggregation points initially. Regarding the point on the cartels, I think waste management has a different face or structure in many different parts of the world. There are always going to be kind of vested interests in regards to collection. So the structure here in Lagos State is that we have private companies, mostly small to medium enterprises that actually operate large compactors, and they're kind of zoned in different regions of the city to collect waste management. That also is a pretty organized structure. So for us, we've had a very good partnership with the Waste Management Authority in Lagos State, which is who is in charge of the waste that is generated in the state.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. Another question here, and I will perhaps send this one to Emil, because Emil and Wale as well. How has the decline in the market of recyclables globally affected your business? Daniel too, so all three of you.
Nice. Yeah. So I picked this up about 2015, 2016. I picked up this trend in dry recycling and managing the commodity that it was at the time, just very difficult. What we ended up doing is we would give clients a rebate at that point, but the price kept decreasing on a monthly basis, and it just became too much hard work to actually manage that. And we stopped issuing rebates through to our clients. I think one of as you get to a more sizable operation, it does become very, very difficult to sustainably employ and engage in that trade. Operations of covering costs on rent, fuel, salaries, at those margins, it just, for us as a company, it just didn't work, and it was something that we then stopped issuing throughout to our customers. So yeah, to me, one of the most important aspects of this, where the opportunity comes from, is getting your primary offtake market to a higher valued item as quickly as possible. So past pallets, to roof sheeting or lining or landfill lining. I think what people in the space haven't seen the opportunity in is getting to an economy of scale within that product item, or where that raw material actually needs to end up. And I think once they get to an item like that, which can service an export market, I think the game then changes for the value of these items.
Right.
And until you get to that point, it just, to me, it just didn't make any sense. So that's why we've moved away from it.
Okay, Daniel, how is it affecting your business?
I mean, okay, there's always fluctuation. Actually, at the moment, we're getting calls every day for people who want to buy more recycled materials because of the Texas winter shutdown. Basically, Texas oil production has shut down for a month, which means that all global companies are buying from Saudi Arabia. So companies across Africa, prices have gone down by like 30%. So the plastic virgin price at the moment is as high as it hasn't been for 5 years. So at the moment, plastic recycling has more demand than ever. That's a very short-term peak. But generally, plastic prices have actually been quite high. So on plastics, it's not really a problem that the price per se is low. But I think relating to the last point, it really depends on what quality of material you're providing in the market. So the less value addition you do, and the value addition doesn't necessarily mean that you make a new product. I actually think that's quite risky. But it's more like the higher quality your raw material is, the cleaner it is, the better it is washed. Like the price difference to if you just don't wash and just crush a material that's very dirty, you might be getting 50% of the price than someone else selling the same kind of plastic just because his is cleaner. So I think it's more like a quality and price issue go together. But for the right quality, I think it's often viable to process it. It just means you need more equipment to go there. And that's kind of thing where a lot of small scale recyclers are caught up in, that at their price, at their quality point, it doesn't make enough sense, but they don't have the capital resources and the infrastructure to invest into the next quality level. So I think that, again, as a not so short answer.
Okay, thank you. And now to you, Wale.
Yeah, I think just not to kind of drag this point on too much, but we saw in 2016 that China banned imports of plastics. And there was a price shock, initially to a lot of people that were exporting plastics from Africa. I think once that's, settled down, a lot of people that converted recyclables or exported recyclables started investing in value addition locally. So for us in Nigeria, we actually saw 2 new value addition plants come online in that period of time. So demand actually has stayed stable and the price continues to go up. In Europe, there's continuously mandates around how much recyclable plastics need to go into new packaging. So that is driving the price of, RPEX or recycled plastics higher. So for us, the price, continues to increase even with oil prices at the all-time low, although oil prices are coming back up now. So for us, like we haven't seen a major impact other than the initial shock of China stopping imports.
Gotcha. The next question is on behavior change in the African context, and why it is important for people to be able to embrace circularity for it to actually work, and how it's affected the sector. Now, Wale, I'll throw this one back to you because you're doing a lot of education. That's a pivotal role for your company. So what do you feel that the impact has been? If I can just ask everyone else mute, just for this 1 minute. Thank you so much. Yeah, it would be interesting to know what the impact for the behavior change education and awareness has been for you. Quickly, in maybe 2 minutes.
Gotcha. So it's kind of been a journey for us. When we started out in the incentive program, we were really driving at behavior change. That's really what we're trying to do to educate non-recyclables. We quickly learned that the only thing that could use to change behavior, at least on a consistent basis, is incentives and directly money. And I've had really heated conversations with some of our off-takers because of like, we're trying to save the planet. Why don't we not just give us for free? But like, no, we'd rather dump it in the gutter than give it to you for free. So that's the reality that we live in. So for us, we understand fully that in the context that we live in, educating just about how to save the environment is not the critical point. We're also trying to solve poverty. And if you ask me, one of our biggest missions, in addition to offtake of waste, is solving poverty. The amount of livelihood that we have to impact with the, paying people for recyclables is very, very significant for a lot of people. And it's a primary source of income. So for us, we really drive that any funds that we can direct to be able to incentivize and pay people to recycle is what we do. So we don't spend a lot of energy on trying to educate people about how to clean up the environment or save the planet. But look, if you recycle plastics, you can make a lot of money. And that's kind of how we drive the behavior change. And we see it's very, very infectious. We have people that individually can recycle up to 30 tons in a month. That's individuals that bring us recyclables. So it's for us, we just drive the incentives and focus on making sure people understand that they can make a living.
That's true.
And I had a point, Agnes.
Yes.
The other thing, I think often people, when they think about awareness creation, they mostly think about like waste producers, or in the sense like households, individuals, schools. And I think that's ultimately very important. But I think 2 points tend to be forgotten in the conversation. At a larger level, if you live in a low-income area and you cannot afford waste collection services, so there's no one offering that service, any level of awareness creation in the world will not help you. So that's the first point. And secondly, I think the people who need a lot more awareness creation or need exposure to it are actually manufacturers, because ultimately the value of plastics or the value of recyclables is purely dependent on the level of recyclability. So the less recyclable material or packaging is manufactured, so for example, multi-layer with different kinds of plastic types, the lower or the more negative the value is. So ultimately the real value, and for businesses, like Olawale's to work, and they're valued, what they're picking needs to have a value. And sadly, a lot of waste doesn't have a value, not because it couldn't have, just because it's poorly designed and the designers didn't care. They just looked at certain visuals or marketing things, but not on the recyclability. So I think education manufacturers, including enforcement, is really, really important on that level as well.
Right. And I think if I may throw in another point here is the legislative or government aspect. There's a lot of education, not directly from entrepreneurs or the private sector, as you would think, but from bigger organizations, bigger multilateral funders, and even just a global perspective from the coming up of the SDGs and needing to take up circularity models more. We're seeing more governments get educated about the impact that actually taking up recycling and better waste management is going to have for the benefit of their countries, for the benefit and the health of their people. So that's also very interesting, I find, to think about. Now, the last question, which I will throw to one of you and give them only 3 minutes to answer, is on the buyback model and whether you have found it feasible for whatever models and whatever businesses that you're running. So who's going to take that one? Okay.
I can take it.
Wale? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really our model. So WeCyclers really goes into communities to educate people about recycling, but we offer an incentive and we tie prices to each category of waste. So plastic bottles get a certain value, cans, and so on and so forth. And we've actually tied it to sorting. So people actually sort to get more value. So we pay cans. Cans are the most valuable, obviously, aluminum cans. And if you bring a bag that's mixed with cans and plastic bottles, we give you the lesser value material. So people have learned quickly that, look, we're going to sort, cans in one bag, plastic bottles in one bag, and so on and so forth. So that actually teaches the sorting aspect of waste in the household. So people are bringing sorted material straight to our facilities. And so we actually have pickup locations or drop-off locations where people drop off their recyclables, and we have agreed on prices that they're using to incentivize. So absolutely, it works wonders. I think obviously the challenge for recyclers that are in our space or in spaces where there's not a lot of offtake downstream. So for instance, not a lot of value addition. It's harder to tie incentives to that because you don't have you can't sell for a higher value. So you can't really make a good business case to buy these materials at a good price to incentivize more collections. So it's always going to be tied back to making sure that there is a more higher value, offtake that will allow us to pay more to incentivize, the buyback.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. So thank you again to our entrepreneurs. That was Wale Adebi of WeCyclers, Emil Furi of Y Waste, and Daniel Paffenholz of Taka Solutions. That was a really great session to help us understand more about what our entrepreneurs are doing, some of the innovations in the market, some of the challenges that cut across the different business models, and some of the opportunities that we're seeing. I see we have a few other questions in the chat. Unfortunately, due to time, and trust me, I have tried to drain every single minute and second of this. We'll have to move on to the next segment, which will be our investor segment. We've heard from the entrepreneurs. We've taken half of our journey understanding circularity in the region. Now let's hear from our investors, find out what excites them, what they're looking for in some of the business models that they would like to potentially invest in, and some of the opportunities and maybe challenges they may be having. An interesting point that came up was the mismatch as we were listening to the entrepreneurs between the funding and the capital being provided and what's realistically possible and what entrepreneurs are able to do on the ground. So that will be also something interesting to uncover and understand as the entrepreneurs take this conversation, as the investors take this conversation over. But before that, we have one more polling question. Great, thank you so much, Mercy. So this next poll was to understand the most significant barrier to growth for waste enterprises. This could come from the conversation as we've been listening, but also I know that we have entrepreneurs joining us as part of our audience. And I see that one of the key challenges is barriers actually, is policy and regulation, and then there's access to finance, and then there's, the fragmentation of the industry, access to markets, which all I think have come up as we were listening to the enterprises present. So thank you so much for that. I'll now introduce the next segment for the investors. And so we are going to be having Tine Fiske of BSF, Bestseller Foundation. I've gotten so used to them that I just threw in the BSF there. So it's the Bestseller Foundation. We're also going to be having Ian Aboyeji of Future Fund Africa and Greg McDonald of Edge Growth Fund. So our investors are going to, as I mentioned, take 3 to 5 minutes to each introduce themselves and their respective organizations, highlight what they seek in potential investees and what excites them in the sector. So I'll give you your time. We can start with Tine, and then we'll handle questions towards the end.
Agnes, can I actually perhaps suggest that we let the guests go first, just in the interest of time, and then I'll see absolutely what I want to get across at the end.
Yes.
Oh, Agnes, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you so much for that. And you're absolutely right. In that case, I am going to go to throw the ball at Greg.
Keeping us on our toes here. Thank you all. Good to meet you all virtually. And yeah, it's been a great conversation so far. So just some background on myself. I work for a company called Edge Growth, and we are an impact investor based in South Africa. We focus predominantly on the enterprise and supply development space. And we utilize partnerships with corporates to provide funding into the SME sector predominantly across South Africa as a country. We generally tend to be sector agnostic. Really, our main aim is to drive impact through the development of SMEs, seeing them as a growth engine for the economy. The fund that I work with specifically is the CISA fund. So we get all of our funding from the asset managers and life insurers within South Africa. And so we generally try and focus on businesses that are somehow related to the financial services supply chain. So I guess the question is, why am I sitting at this table with that description? So we have recently partnered with the Green Outcomes Fund in Green Cape, which has really helped shift our focus towards increasing our exposure and intentionally looking for investment opportunities within the green space. And that covers, a wide range of opportunities from green energy, etc., but includes the circular economy and waste recycling and management. So over the last few years, we've seen quite an increase in the number of businesses that have applied for funding from this space. We've got a couple in our portfolio already. And so, yeah, we're excited to continue to invest in this space as an additional form of impact, because we find it to be not only environmentally the right thing to do, but also something that can be done economically and create value for an investor like ourselves, but also create impact in the form of job creation and SME growth. So that's a little bit of the context. So what are we looking for in this space specifically? Generally, we just, given our mandates, we don't generally look at complete greenfields projects. We'll try and look for a business that has some traction, but really wants to scale. We just want to be able to know that the entrepreneurs who've started the business have what it takes to at least get the business going, and that there's good kind of market fit, that what they're offering has a place in the market. Within the green space, we tend to provide debt funding, because what we've noticed is that a lot of the funding that's required is for machinery and equipment, as well as for working capital, rather than typical equity funding that you might see in more of the VC startups. That doesn't mean we won't look at that if the opportunity does allow. I think one of the opportunities that we're seeing is for traditional waste managers of all sizes. We've come across a few small to mid-sized waste managers who currently don't have recycling as part of their business model. They just do waste to landfill, who are actively seeking adding a circular component to their business. So they already have a good source of waste and trying to now turn that into usable and useful outputs for them and inputs to other customers. So we're seeing that as quite exciting. And I think, if I think about a couple of the areas that we'd like to see improved in this space, one would be consumer education within South Africa. I think there's a lack of understanding around the need for, in particular, recycling, even at a home level, let alone at business level. I think in the Western Cape, we have it a bit better than other provinces. But, I grew up in Joburg, and, very few of my friends, they recycle just because people aren't made aware of it. So I think consumer education is important, but also education around the importance of using recycled products as a consumer on the back end. Another area that would be useful would be R&D for innovation. I mean, I've heard it mentioned by a few of the previous panelists that there are ways to innovate in the space. And I think the ability to invest in that innovation, whether that's for corporate innovation or government support, would be quite useful. And then the third is a point that was raised earlier, which is that I've noticed that a lot of the businesses that have come across our desk tend to rely quite strongly on contracts as cash flow. So waste removal contracts from municipal governments or corporates, and then they'll just sort and sell the recycled material without the beneficiation component that was mentioned earlier on. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to increase the amount of beneficiation that the SMEs that we come across are involved in. Obviously, that requires funding and expertise, and that can sometimes be the barrier. Some of the things that are exciting me are just seeing the amount of activity that's happening in the space, the increase in that activity, not only from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a funding perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and just a strong sense that a lot of players are wanting to come to the party to improve the work that's happening within this space. So it's something that I'm enjoying being a part of, especially as we've kind of made the recent partnerships that we have as a fund. So that's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. That was very, very useful. Sheds a lot of light on what investors are looking at. Some of the interesting things that I noted are your interest towards some of the traditional models that actually work. I think in a world where we're constantly looking for the next big unicorn and all of those big buzzwords and big companies, it's very useful to still look at the actual businesses on the ground that have been working, relying on the infrastructure and still delivering the impact and the commercial viability that's useful for investors to look at. So that was very useful. The next person I will call on is Ian Aboyeji of Future Fund Africa. Ian, you have 5 minutes.
Sure. I imagine I should take a lot less than that. My name is Ian Aboyeji. I've spent the last 10 years in the tech industry. I helped co-found Flutterwave and Andela, both of which have become very large companies that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Took a break in 2019, and then 2020 decided to build out of my angel investment portfolio a fund called the Fund for Africa's Future, more colloquially known as Future Africa. And what Future Africa does is that we support innovators, startup founders, entrepreneurs to be able to turn the continent's biggest challenges, of which waste is one of the biggest ones, into global business opportunity. We do that by providing these innovators with capital from our community of investors, co-investors, in the collective, coaching, as well as a sense of community through our network. And we're specifically focused as a fund on investing in technology and talent, digital and physical infrastructure, media, and the environment. We've been very well established in the technology space, as well as in the media and infrastructure space, but we've just started to really dig into what it means for us to deeply invest in the environment. One of the core pillars of our environment fund strategy is agriculture. So really thinking differently about how smallholder agriculture can be more beneficial, not just to the environment, but to the local economies, rural economies, as opposed to your big plantation style investments, and thinking about how you can make smallholder farming, decentralized smallholder farming, more profitable. But along those lines as well is our interest in the circular economy and waste to value. And we've been thoroughly educated by Tine and her team at the BESTSELLER Foundation about so many things that is possible for us to do in that space. And we're excited because we've been learning, especially on this call, to talk about the challenges as well as the opportunities in that space. Thank you.
You were right. You were right on time, actually. So thank you so much for that. The brevity and just how specific you are to the conversation. One thing I might have missed is what type of instrument you're using while investing in any circular economy ventures that you've looked at.
So we have not yet done any round, but we're working on a couple, and our typical instruments don't largely change. So we invest very early stage equity checks of $25,000 just to get folks started. And then as we grow the business, we're able to syndicate from our co-investor collective $250,000 and above.
Okay, are there any specific things that you look at in the businesses that you invest in? I mean, we always have the strong business model, competent financial model and all that. So do you have anything unique that you look at for your enterprises?
Yeah, as we've developed the thesis, I think what we're excited about when we look at these businesses is trying to find replicable IP. So we're looking for new methods of converting plastic to waste to value, particularly in the plastic space. We're looking at new molds, we're looking at new products that can be created with the plastic. We're looking at research into the different use cases of the plastic and the material science behind those conversations and how we can replicate that right? In more modular formats. We're thinking about the value chain, particularly access to markets, and how it's possible for us to build kind of a more robust value chain, especially from how do you reward people who actually recycle? What are the tools and platforms that can enable that to happen? All the way to how do you build out financing solutions for people who are engaged in this space? So we're really not gonna like fund people to like buy plastic. That's not really our spiel. Our spiel is really like all the replicable IP and processes around how waste to value happens are things that we're extremely interested in.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. Before we move on to Tine, another interesting insight that I've sort of picked up is on the need for both capital and capacity building or coaching. I mean, again, as we were assessing the different challenges that we face across the value chain, yes, financing is a huge aspect, but there's also somewhat a need to integrate capacity building for enterprises so that you can build their skills and technical know-how to be able to understand the different models and markets they work in and also scale their businesses. And that was very interesting that you mentioned that's one of the aspects that you're focused on. So thank you for that. And now we are going to hand over to Tine, who's representing the Bestseller Foundation. Again, a reminder, our host for this lovely session. And before we do, I'll also remind you that we have the mural that's still ongoing. The link is on the chat. Share as many questions as you have for the investors. Also fill our mural, because after this, we'll get to go through some of these activities that all of us are doing within the sector. So Tine, over to you.
Thanks, Agnes. And I'm going to try and be relatively short and sweet, as you've also heard from both Yannick and Waza, my colleagues. So, but just to give a little bit more background, the Bestseller Foundation is a private impact investing foundation. And as Yannick also said, our mandate really is to spark growth by investing in circular economy and waste to value businesses. Our work is made possible through the support of Bestseller Corporate, which is a global fashion group. And as a foundation, we have the opportunity to provide early stage capital and fill in some of the funding gaps that we've also talked about here. And we actually take that really, really seriously. So our direct investment strategy is split into two main priorities: startups and more mature growth stage companies, scale-ups, if you will. For both of these, we provide relatively flexible capital, both in terms of instrument and size, and we can talk a little bit more about what that means if that comes up in the questions. But some of the key things we look for are local founders and a significant impact case at the core of the business model. And I'm smiling because you're going to tease me now, Agnes, because we, of course, also look for our more mature businesses, a proven business model and a viable business case and all that, profitable businesses or businesses with clear to near-term path to being profitable, and also potential for scale. However, having said that, we focus on oxen or zebras, whatever your favorite animal is, to demonstrate kind of backbone SMME, not necessarily unicorns. And then beyond our direct investment strategy, we also appreciate that the circular economy or the waste to value sector are nascent, also popping up in the chat, right, across Sub-Saharan Africa. And the ecosystem therefore also needs support. And we therefore also focus on both direct and indirect support, as well as contributing towards the development of the ecosystem by pushing knowledge, networks, demonstrating business cases, etc., like this session, of course. And I think it's also important to say that we're also on a learning journey as a foundation, right? We're not circular economy experts. We also have a lot to learn about waste to value. So to start this journey, we've partnered with Intellecap, as Yannick also managed to mention, to launch an investment-backed waste to value accelerator, which kicked off in August last year. 5 companies are part of this accelerator. 2 they are based in Uganda and Kenya, and they do everything from, say, plastic pavers to tech-based waste collection to biomass briquettes. And we've also recently invested in 2 additional waste to value businesses in Kenya and Rwanda. As Waza also mentioned, to widen our impact, we have expanded our mandate beyond East Africa to focus on Sub-Saharan Africa at large. And we are quite actively looking for opportunities for both startups and scale-ups, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us after this. Now, when also engaging with entrepreneurs both in the portfolio and outside, we've also heard, as we've seen in the polls, right, that capital is not necessarily the most significant issue. It really is also a fragmented industry, limited interactions, policy frameworks, business model understanding, etc. So I think one of the things that's really exciting and that we're seeing catching on is really that there's increased interest from stakeholders, investors, intermediaries, etc., to also potentially take a page from the energy access book, right, where a lot of resources actually gone into understanding the business models, to really interrogating the capital needs, to doing the right policy and the right networks, and also significant amounts of blended finance. And that's some of the things that's quite exciting. So also, thank you. I see that there's a few of you that's also filled in the mural, and we will kind of collate a lot of these findings and also share them with all of you afterwards.
Great. Thank you so much, Tine. That was lovely to hear more about what the Bestseller Foundation is doing. And as they mentioned, they are looking for opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa now, which is very interesting to note. I think we'll quickly just jump to the questions. This one I will send to all of you, and it's on pipeline creation. I noticed that all of you different investors have different focus for the stage of businesses that you're investing with. And so Kevin asks if you find it hard to create pipeline or for different stage, let me say different stage or scale companies in the sector. And this is especially because the circular economy sector is quite nascent, which I think we can all agree at this point. So perhaps you can start with Greg.
I think the answer in short is yes. I think the more you are involved in the space, the easier it is to come across deal pipeline. But as a funder, I think that's one of the things that is usually the biggest struggle in general. And I don't think this sector is too different. What it does require is being a little bit more focused around the networks that you build, maybe it's events you go to, the type of marketing material that you put out there. So for example, on the Green Outcomes Fund work that we did, our partnership with the likes of Green Cape, who are a sector body that strongly supports the work in the green economy. We've got very good networks across, everything from government to SMEs to corporates. That's really helped from a deal sourcing perspective. So I'd say that it is difficult, especially if you go it alone, but the partnerships definitely help if you can find the right people in the space.
Absolutely. I agree with you on the need for partnerships for better deal sourcing. Ian?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what I find is missing is kind of a sense of a value chain and a willingness to kind of build out specialists in certain aspects of the value chain. I feel like a lot of the companies that we see are trying to build kind of a fully vertically integrated businesses, which is impressive, but given the kind of scale of the problem, actually building out expertise at one stage of the value chain and then being able to build the linkages across the value chain is perhaps even more important. So like a specific example that I can give, for example, is, when it comes to even the process, because at the end of the day, what drives the value of everything is going to be, like one speaker said earlier, how the plastics that are collected are valued by manufacturers and how that kind of cascades down the chain. So, who's driving standards around manufacturing such that, it's easy for us to pick up, classify and recycle plastics, right? So people are not doing too much freestyling, as we like to call it, where, they're leveraging different grades of plastic, making it more difficult for people to price and things like that. And then all the way down to how are we organizing people whose entire job is basically going and picking up the plastic from homes or sorting trash. How are we incentivizing that system? And then how are we providing liquidity across the chain? Mm-hmm. So my sense is that once the value chain is properly organized, it's going to be a lot easier to unlock opportunities and scale it, because obviously there is still a problem. There's a lot of plastics in our gutters. our beaches, in our oceans. So there is still a problem. But what's clear is that the industry is not yet organized enough for scale where people are happy kind of focusing on one aspect of the value chain. You still have a lot of repetitive action, which really hurts the ability to compound value and be dealt fairly with by the large manufacturers who are the ultimate buyers.
Yeah, okay. I'll also shift that question to Tine.
Yeah, no, but I think one can do it a little bit short and sweet like Greg, right? Like, I think the short answer is yes, and specifically on the growth stage as well. I mean, we've heard from some really, really good companies today who's a bit more mature, but yes, it's not necessarily easy, and obviously for the reasons that E also mentioned. The startup scene, a little bit different, quite a lot more opportunities, of course. And I think one of the ways that we kind of get around it is, yes, also definitely through partnerships, yes, also definitely partnership with other investors, but also really to kind of get them young to some extent as well, right? Like, we've also made some very early stage investments from student ventures and really kind of tapping into different networks. And then, yeah, really trying to go through partnership networks for the more growth one, and then also trying to kind of broaden out and making sure that we see the different opportunities of startups. But yes, no, it is a little bit tricky.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. I like that all the investors have highlighted some of the opportunities within the sector when it comes to deal sourcing, but also some of the challenges in being able to source the right deals and the right matches. The next question is to Ian from Cheryl, and it's that with your experience with digital, or I would say digitization, do you help founders to digitize their models?
Yes, I mean that's where we want to add the most value in this space. So when we talk about, for example, when we're thinking about the process for rewarding people for bringing in plastic or bringing in recyclables, as a practical example, since that's what the conversation has been centered on, how is that process built out as infrastructure, right? Such that anybody can kind of buy plastic from the highest bidder, right? And that incentivizes people to kind of move it. How are we incentivizing people who are known to consistently deliver volumes that are required? How are we incentivizing people to kind of build value chains around these things? So just in general, there's a lot of tech to be built, even down to how do you collateralize the waste as it moves through the value chain? Because it doesn't make sense for people to be exchanging cash for something we already know has an end product value. So how do you build forward contracts into the model from the large manufacturers, kind of the way we're doing carbon credits today? So all this stuff is possible to build, and tech will be required to kind of make everything transparent.
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think you've covered that very well. Sorry for the phone ringing in the background. I hope it's not as noisy as I hear it. But the next question is by Judith, and I find it very interesting. It's she asks whether commitments from large FMCG players such as Coca-Cola on using recycled materials for their packaging offer comfort to an investor to invest in the recycling sector. Can these commitments be relied upon, or are they mere PR stunts? And I think this also edges into the extended producer responsibility, right? There's a lot of conversation about that in East Africa, and a lot of these companies are coming back to actually be responsible for the plastic that they produce, and are trying to work more directly with private sector. And a lot of companies and startups now are relying on that to actually set up businesses and get into the sector. So one question is whether you feel if they are actually something that can be relied upon for entrepreneurs who are very ambitious setting up businesses in the sector, and whether they offer any comfort to you investors.
I'm happy to take first on this one. I see that Daniel also provided an initial answer, and I agree with his sentiment there, just by saying that these commitments do tend to be genuine, and they do exist. Often the issue is that they need too much volume for the smaller players to provide. So what we've noticed happens is that you end up with aggregators or larger middlemen who will be a single point of supply to the likes of Coca-Cola in this example, say a Nampak in South Africa, a large packaging manufacturer, listed company, and they'll be the ones that would then source the offtake from the various smaller recycling providers. And then depending on what that corporate is, that would determine how reliable their contracts are. But as a whole, there's strong demand for the large FMCG players, or by the large FMCG players. They just tend to go through larger middlemen just because of their volumes, and they don't want to have a fragmented supply chain. So I do think there is an opportunity there for a more nimble aggregator of some kind, especially in some of the niche FMCG spaces. But yeah, and then to answer the question from an investor lens, yes, of course, having those types of offtakes definitely do give investors a lot more confidence that at least there's some baseline of revenue committed as long as the company can produce the volumes.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. Ian?
I think there is definitely like a market making problem in that space, in the sense that you can see these commitments and they're real and they're backed by real money. But, you know, oftentimes because it's a very disorganized market, it's not easy for you to kind of roll through those credits as required, right? And I think that's work for blockchain to do. And I'm looking for very innovative entrepreneurs that kind of are able to figure out that intersection between, you know, how do we take plastics that are sitting in our gutters, sitting on our beaches, and then convert them? And the honest truth is that if you really think about it, without going into too much detail, it's a full value chain because those plastics come from somewhere. So how do we know, okay, we've put out, you know, 80 million plastic bottles into the world. How many of those can you help us get back within the next 8 to 12 months? And we can actually earmark the amount of money that will go back to like recycling that. And then, you know, make that productize that into a portion of the retail price of a bottle of water, and then actually build a system that actually brings that back as quickly as possible. So, you know, once we build out a very solid market making platform for this, and I think a brilliant startup is going to solve this problem, and they would probably get money from us to do so. Then we start to really get at the heart of the problem, and then it becomes tradable credits and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Tine, do you have anything to add?
No, not necessarily anything to add. I think exactly what Greg said, right? Like, yes, of course, it adds comfort. And I think we've also seen a lot more serious and larger partnerships being entered, which is quite exciting.
Great, thank you for that. Another question that has popped up here, and I think this brings into perspective the various types of waste that we see being generated. We have plastic, we have agricultural and bio-waste, we have electronic waste, among others. So there's a question here on whether there are any funds available for electronic waste management, or rather I'll just focus that on you as the investors, whether you have a focus on e-waste.
Yeah, no, I think from our side, I mean, we don't discriminate between the waste flows. So no, it would be included in
okay, have you, but have you come across a lot of enterprises working within the e-waste sort of industry as compared to plastic and bio-waste, especially?
No, I think it is one of the bigger waste streams that we see. Is it as big as plastic? Probably not, right? But it's definitely, and we haven't made any investments in the sector yet, but it's definitely one of the ones that we're looking at with quite a lot of interest and following the developments in.
Thank you. Ian and Greg?
Yeah, I think for us, we're definitely looking at that value chain. Again, you know, our approach looking at this thing is system-wide. So, you know, the components of any kind of device are well known. We have a fair sense of how many of them are disposed of every year. I think one area where we're definitely looking at put together the value chain is in the insurance space, particularly when it comes to used devices. So when a device has to be pieced out, is it possible for us to be able to kind of find good parts out of the bad parts and then use that as parts for newer elements so that we can reduce the waste. For us, there's a huge opportunity to collateralize the reuse of all the materials, and that has a huge $1 trillion potential in our minds to actually change how we are able to turn waste to value.
Great. Greg, any thoughts?
Yeah, without repeating what's been said, we definitely wouldn't discriminate against digital waste as a subsector. I think, as with all of any application or any proposal, it would need to have answers to some of the typical questions it's experienced in the space. You know, sourcing of the materials, the collection of the materials, sorting into components, and then offtake and use cases. And so those are, given that this is a newer type of waste recycling versus plastics and tin and glass, that's still developing, but definitely a sector that is important.
Okay. Great, thank you so much for those insights. We have maybe 1 more minute that I'm adding myself, just so I can throw this question in. But what kind of innovative funding mechanisms are you feeling that as investors you might need to focus on to be able to properly target, reach, and be matched with entrepreneurs who are working within the sector? I think from the conversations we've identified that the value chain is still, is still very broken. There's so many issues and challenges at each stage. And so some of the, methods and traditional instruments and, funds disbursement methods that we have so far might not quite be a fit. So is there any way you are trying to innovate on your products, or maybe how you actually try to reach these entrepreneurs that you feel has worked for you and that you would advise other investors to sort of consider?
I think this is an area where the ecosystem has to come together and build some new offerings and products. So, for example, we do know there's a huge kind of material science research gap on the continent, and there's a need to fill that gap. And there are a lot of brilliant scientists that are looking at alternatives to different products and different ways that we can use and reuse plastics and other kinds of e-waste. And so, what kind of funding is appropriate for that? It's probably not venture funding. It's probably not debt funding. It's probably grant funding. There's a lot of bank loans that are currently going unused because companies are not at the scale where they can take a $70 to $90 million carbon credit backed loan from the EIB or somebody else. And there's a need to kind of aggregate those needs across multiple different platforms and collateralize those products so that it's easy for some of our growing companies to access as they grow, because that oftentimes tends to be the limitation to their growth. There's no reason why plastic recycling companies should be going the route of actually going to pick up.
Great, thank you for that. Greg and Tine, any thoughts?
Yeah, not a lot to add. I think we do try to be innovative in the funding we provide. We see other funders doing the same. I think one of the keys around the innovation is taking a slightly longer term view. So with the products you use, creating patient products, whether that's even if it's a loan, the repayment profile or equity, etc. But I think to Ian's point, it's going to take a collaboration of multiple parties across the industry and sector and stakeholder landscape to get it right. It's going to need to be a blended financing approach, some grant, some R&D, some debt, some equity, and that will depend on the case by case basis. But I think that collaboration and blended model is going to be key.
Yeah, no, and I think we definitely agree with that. I mean, we're continuously also looking at both our instruments, where I think you also asked about, Agnes, right? And we can be relatively flexible on that. But also, as Greg said, right, there's a need for more blended finance. And what we've been hearing being tossed around a little bit more and more is kind of this whole notion of impact-linked finance, right? And you could argue that to some extent, the waste sector actually lends itself really nicely to that, because there are some pretty measurable targets that you could create. And then the metrics becomes a little bit more easier to set up, but then you do have a relatively nice public-private concessionary kind of more non-concessionary capital that can be allocated. So we're continuously looking at that, and also different partnerships. But right now also our focus is mainly on really getting the instrument right also at the different stages.
Great, very well said. So thank you so much to all of our investors. I think we are approaching time now, and this is towards the end. We wanted to find out from the audience and the participants what have been some of the most exciting points from this conversation for you. Any takeaways or any further contributions you also have. Feel free to share them on the chat, and then I'll be reading them as we continue to close this conversation. Another thing is I've been asking about the mural through the conversation, giving you small prompts here and there to please fill it. Tina gave me some good news at some point that things were looking active there. So we'd like to maybe go through some of the discussion areas or some of the activities that we see the stakeholders carrying out as we also give those comments on the chat box. Well, sorry, everyone. We're unable to share the screen from our side. We'll just try again. But given the time, I think we can always come back to all of our participants, and you're also able to access the mural anyway. So you'll be able to tell what activities we've been having, what different players and stakeholders are also doing in the market, and what to follow up on. I think as we conclude on the conversation, I'd like to thank you everyone for being such a great audience, to our lovely participants who've given us such an engaging conversation, very useful for us to understand. It's been a lovely journey going through circularity in the whole of the region, looking at some of the models, hearing from investors, and also hearing from the audience. So I hope you've been able to have a holistic conversation out of this, like we were hoping. Oh, I see the mural now coming up. But I think just like we've agreed here, we'll all just be able to go back to that at our own time. So thank you very much. Is there anything else from the Bestseller Foundation team maybe you want to add?
No, I think we just want to say a huge thanks to you as well, Agnes, for taking us well through this session. Thanks a lot to Intellecap for making it happen.
Great, thank you. And with that, I think we call it the end of a very successful session. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Have a good rest of the Sankalp time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.